All right, let's jump straight into this explainer on the Renaissance. When we usually talk about this era, we're picturing what? Breathtaking art, right? But underneath all that paint and marble, it was actually a time of massive, system shaking political upheaval. So, how exactly did a linguist and a monk manage to shatter the ultimate superpower of the 16th century? Seriously, it's the ultimate David versus Goliath story. We're going to look at how just two guys, armed with some radical ideas and brand new tech, completely upended the unquestionable authority of the papacy. Okay, let's look at Chapter 3, Church and State. To really get why this clash was so intense, we have to remember the vibe of Europe between 1400 and 1600. It was literally impossible to separate religious belief from everyday politics. The church wasn't just a place you went on Sundays, it was the ultimate administrative machine. I mean, they controlled international finance, local politics, the whole shebang. There was zero line between the sacred and the secular. Which brings us to the first big crack in that massive foundation, the forged donation. Enter our first underdog, humanist scholar Lorenzo Valla in 1435. Valla took a hard look at the donation of Constantine, basically the papacy's historical VIP pass to claim sweeping earthly powers, supposedly granted back in the 4th century. But Valla, using pure linguistic analysis, exposed it as a total fake, an 8th century forgery. He found historical anachronisms, terrible Latin that didn't even match the era. He completely roasted them. He literally asked the papacy, did you forge this yourselves or did you just not know? Just an absolutely massive blow to their claim on worldly power. But of course, the church didn't just take that lying down. They doubled down using monumental art as damage control. This dramatic fresco by Raphael's workshop shows the emperor handing over power to the pope. It's straight-up visual propaganda, blasted on the walls of the Vatican, desperately trying to sell a myth that Valla had already totally debunked. Moving on to the next major catalyst here, the price of glory. So geopolitically, things were getting incredibly tense. Constantinople had fallen in 1453, the Ottoman Empire was knocking at the door, and Rome felt this desperate need to project absolute dominance. That pressure pushed Pope Julius II to make a wildly expensive move in 1506, building the new St. Peter's Basilica. The goal? Build the most epic monument on Earth. The problem? Epic monuments cost an absolute fortune. To foot this massive architectural bill, the church leaned into selling indulgences. Essentially, they told everyday believers, hey, buy this piece of paper and your sins are forgiven, even the ones you haven't committed yet. It was literally the commercialization of faith, turning eternal salvation into a quick fundraising commodity for a building project. And that brings us to the absolute breaking point: a monk's rebellion. This blatant financial exploitation was just too much for a German monk named Martin Luther. After visiting Rome and seeing the lavish spending firsthand, he was disgusted. In 1517, he dropped his now famous 95 Theses. And he did not hold back. He pointedly asked why the incredibly wealthy pope wasn't using his own cash to build St. Peter's instead of draining the pockets of poor believers. It was a direct, explosive challenge to the whole system. What Luther did was trigger a historic theological shift. The church's official stance was basically that salvation required a middleman, a priest, and preferably a financial transaction. Luther threw that entire concept out the window. He argued that salvation required absolute faith and nothing else. No earthly gatekeepers, no cash exchanges, just a direct, unmediated, personal relationship with God. Next up, the power of the printed word. Now, historically, a rebellious monk running his mouth usually meant a quick, quiet execution. But Luther had a secret weapon on his side, the printing press. Between 1517 and 1520, he didn't just preach, he became a publishing powerhouse. He pushed out over 30 tracts, distributing an absolutely staggering 300,000 printed copies. To put that in perspective, for the 16th century, that scale of information distribution was completely unprecedented. This was the 16th century equivalent of going totally viral, and his strategy was brilliant. Instead of writing in elite Latin like the church did, he wrote in plain, everyday German so regular people could actually read it. By 1520, 62 different cities were pumping out his ideas on their presses. He even translated the whole Bible into German and sold 100,000 copies. He weaponized this new tech to completely bypass the church's monopoly on information and speak directly to the masses. which forces the empire to strike back. The Counter-Reformation. Goliath wasn't going down without a fight. The Catholic Church realized pretty quickly that pretty paintings weren't going to fix this. They needed a massive, systemic counterattack. So in 1540, they found the highly disciplined Jesuit order to champion Catholic education. In 1542, they fire up the Roman Inquisition to hunt down heretics. They spend 18 years at the Council of Trent tightening up their doctrines. And by 1563, they're dropping the Index of Forbidden Books, literally banning dangerous thinkers like Luther and even political writers like Machiavelli. So did this institutional counterattack work? Well, kind of. The church did manage to claw back roughly a third of the followers they'd lost. But the larger consequence was that it carved a massive, permanent ideological trench right through the middle of Europe. It deeply polarized the religious landscape forever, setting the stage for decades of devastating religious wars that would totally reshape the continent. All right, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this to chew on. We just saw how a sharp linguist and an angry monk used analytical thinking and a new communications tool to fracture a global superpower. They prove that when a radical idea collides with revolutionary tech, literally no institution is safe. So looking at our world right now, what unshakable institutions are currently in the crosshairs of today's viral technologies? Thanks for joining me on this one, and as always, keep questioning things.